Have you ever wondered what it would be like to leave everything behind and live completely isolated on a deserted island? What if that were the only way to find peace and purpose? Exactly 50 years ago, the desire to live a simple life in harmony with nature led the New Zealander Thomas Neale to voluntarily transform himself into a kind of real-life Robinson Crusoe. He became a voluntary castaway, famous in the South Pacific region during the 1970s. He abandoned civilization and decided to live his days as a true voluntary castaway on one of the most remote and beautiful regions of the planet. What makes a person leave everything behind and live alone on a deserted island? What reasons could there be to trade the comfort of a bed, the security of a home, and the company of others for a life of total isolation? In times like ours, where we are always connected, full of commitments and distractions, the idea may seem absurd to many. But for Tom Neale, it was the dream of a lifetime. The beginning of it all. Neale's journey began many years before he finally set foot on the deserted atoll of Suvaroff in the South Pacific. He didn't just wake up one day and decide, "I'm going to live like a castaway." It was something that had built up over years until the idea became an obsession. But what could have sparked that desire? The answer lies in an encounter he had decades earlier with an American adventurer named Robert Frisbee. Frisbee was a man of many talents, a writer, traveler, and of course, an extraordinary storyteller. As he described to Neale a paradise he had discovered on his travels, he highlighted every detail with such precision that it made the New Zealander's heart race. It was a remote place, an atoll surrounded by turquoise blue lagoons with islets of lush vegetation, a place where time seemed not to exist. Now imagine yourself sitting, listening to that description. With every word, the image of the island formed more clearly in Neale's mind. "It's the most beautiful place on earth," Frisbee emphasized. That phrase echoed in Neale's head for years. He was tired of the dull life he led, a bland life, and that description lit a fire within him. The Island of Dreams. When Tom Neale decided he wanted to go to Suvaroff, he was already over 40 years old. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined. It wasn't enough just to visit the island. He wanted to live there, and not just in any way. He wanted to live with as little as possible, to sustain himself from nature, as primitive men did. Modern life, with its comforts and complications, simply didn't attract him anymore. The question was, how to get there? Suvaroff wasn't a place where you could simply buy a plane ticket. It was a remote atoll, unknown to most people, located northwest of the Cook Islands. But Neale wasn't discouraged by the difficulties. He managed to convince the captain of a cargo ship to deviate the route to the atoll. And so, in June 1945, Tom Neale set foot for the first time on that piece of land that, in his mind, had already become a home long before he ever stepped there. What he saw upon arrival was exactly what he had expected. The natural beauty, the feeling of being in a world apart, far from everything and everyone. Time seemed to have stopped there. There was only an abandoned shack, built in the past by a few guards who had temporarily lived on the island. But for Neale, that was more than enough. He didn't need luxury, he needed peace. But is living alone on a deserted island really as romantic as it seems? Can solitude really be a companion? Neale believed so, and he was willing to find out. The challenge of solitude. Neale stripped off all his clothes, opting to live nude, in total harmony with nature. The sun, the wind, and the sea were his only companions, and the sense of freedom was indescribable. Soon, he began hunting his own food. The crystal-clear waters of the lagoon were full of fish, crabs, and lobsters, and he caught them with ease. Why stockpile food? He knew the ocean would always be generous to him. But there was one important question. Can a human being really live alone for so long? Doesn't the mind begin to play tricks? We all have a need for social interaction. And for many, prolonged solitude can become unbearable. But Neale seemed to have found the perfect balance. Neale cultivated a small garden and supplemented his diet with seabird eggs and some chickens left behind by the former guards. Months passed, and Neale adapted to his new life. He was fully integrated into his private paradise, as if he were the only person in the world. And for 10 months, he was. The first visitors. Then something happened. 10 months after his arrival, a boat appeared on the horizon. An American sailing couple landed on the island, and what they found left them astonished. A civilized man living alone on a deserted island. They tried to convince Neale to return to civilization, but he refused. For him, this was the only place he wanted to be. The couple, upon returning home, spread the news. There was a hermit of Suvorov, a man living alone in total isolation on a deserted island. And that's when Neale's fame began to grow. More and more people wanted to meet him. They wanted to know how he lived, how it was possible to survive without any contact with the outside world. And it was precisely this unwanted attention that began to bother Neale. He hadn't gone to Suvorov to become a tourist attraction. He wanted peace, and now it seemed like the whole world was after him. The price of fame. Over time, the tranquility Neale so valued was interrupted by curious visitors, journalists, and even fishermen and pearl divers who began frequenting the neighboring islets. Suvorov, once a refuge of silence and solitude, started to become a place of movement. The isolation he so cherished was being threatened. It was then that Neale decided to leave for the first time. He boarded one of the boats visiting the island and went to the capital of the Cook Islands, where he began writing a book about his experience. But something kept pulling him back to Suvorov. Despite all the inconvenience fame had brought him, he couldn't disconnect from the atoll, and so he returned. Older, but still determined to live the way he had always dreamed. The last return. This time, Neale stayed for 10 years in Suvorov, practically alone. The occasional visits were few, and he finally found the peace he had sought for so long. During this period, he began receiving letters from admirers all over the world, people fascinated by his story. Twice a year, a government boat brought the letters and took his replies. But slowly, age began to catch up with him. Neale, now 75 years old, started experiencing stomach pains. He knew something wasn't right and asked for help. A boat was sent to fetch him, and he was taken to a hospital. Neale never returned to the island he loved so much. On November 30th, 1977, Tom Neale passed away. His body was buried in the capital of the Cook Islands, not in Suvorov, as he would have undoubtedly preferred. Tom Neale's story is more than just the account of a man who chose to live alone on a deserted island. It's a reflection on what we truly need to be happy. Neale found happiness in something most people would never consider: solitude. He rejected what many consider essential: companionship, comfort, security, and chose a simple life in harmony with nature. But his story also makes us ask, could we all live that way? Could we abandon everything we know and live with only what nature provides? Or would the solitude, which for Neale was a blessing, become a burden for us? That is the big question Neale's story leaves us with. It challenges us to rethink our own lives, to question what truly matters. Could it be that, in the end, what we seek is something as simple as what Neale found in Suvorov? Or is our pursuit of happiness so intertwined with the modern world that we can no longer see what really makes us content? A modern hermit? In a world where we are constantly connected, where social media and technology keep us in touch all the time, the idea of living like Tom Neale might seem impossible. But perhaps there is something in his story that still resonates with us. After all, who hasn't felt the urge to escape from everything, to leave behind the chaos of modern life and find some peace in a distant place? Maybe it's not necessary to go as far as Neale did. Maybe the key is in finding small moments of solitude amidst the hustle and bustle of daily life. Because deep down, we all have a little bit of hermit inside us, longing for a place where we can truly be free. If you liked the video and want to follow other fantastic real-life survival stories, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. And thank you very much to those of you who are supporting the channel via the link in the comment below. It helps me to keep bringing you more real survivor stories.